Hello and welcome. I am Hanada Taha, and I am pleased to host today's webinar series, and it is the fifth series of the World Bank report titled Advancing Arabic Language Teaching and Learning, a path to reduce learning poverty in the Middle East and North Africa. This event today, which is the fifth event in a series of webinars online, of course, and they are being conducted with the partnership of the Queen Rania Foundation, and they are being held to discuss issues emanated from this important report and to shed more light and to delve deeper with our experts who are joining us today from various places around the world. And the main topic for this webinar focuses on reducing learning poverty in the countries of the Middle East and North Africa through improving the teaching of Arabic language and learning. And today's event will be discussing several methods of supporting struggling readers. And we will focus particularly on engaging boys with literacy skills, and we will also be discussing with our experts today the effective methods and tools to determine the needs of the students related to the Arabic learning and reading literacy skills, and how to handle them and follow them. And of course, that involves early screening to determine who are the students who require extra support and early intervention, as we call it in the pedagogical field. And they also include diagnostic assessments and other support and diagnostic methods in order to improve the achievement level of students in classrooms. And the interventions that are being planned for, but that are also based on evidence in order to provide more support to the students who could need them. I would like to share with you, before we begin our important discussion today with our distinguished guests, I have some quick housekeeping rules. First of all, of course, you can read the report, Advancing Arabic Language Teaching and Learning, which was launched on 29 June 2021. On the World Bank website and the Queen Rania Foundation website in English and in Arabic. And we would also like to inform you that simultaneous interpretation is being provided in English and in Arabic today. And you can also send your questions through the chat box on Zoom, and you can also send us your messages through the social media platforms. So we will be beginning our discussion today, supporting struggling readers and raising boys literacy, which is being hosted by the Queen Rania Foundation and the World Bank. And we will begin, as always, with an opening speech from Mr. Andreas Blom, who is the Education Manager for the Middle East and North Africa region in the World Bank. Mr. Andreas.
You open up our webinars, so please, it's with you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanada. I hope you can hear me. Hello to everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. It is a fantastic pleasure for me to open this fifth webinar on teaching Arabic, learning and literacy. It is the fifth webinar in a row. It is a strong regional effort with full support from the World Bank on promoting Arabic literacy across the Middle East and North Africa. First of all, I would like to thank the participants for using your time. I know you have a busy day and you use your time on logging into this webinar. It's really appreciated. We know this has to be, if we want to really have an impact on literacy, it is in partnership with teachers, with teacher associations, with governments, with ministries, with universities, colleges of education, bilateral partners. It needs to be a movement with a strong attention across the region to improving literacy. So thank you very much for using your time. And thank you very much to Queen Rania Foundation for being a partner in this webinar series. We know that reading is the absolutely most important skill that can be learned in education. If you can learn to read, you can read to learn all through your subsequent years in schooling. But we also know that there is a large percentage of children that do not read with comprehension and that learns too slowly. There is a large agenda in front of us. It is not all governments and stakeholders that are aware of the state of literacy. This is not just for Arabic literacy. This is a global phenomenon that we tend to believe just because the children are attending school that they will learn. And that's not the case. We need to make sure that our time in the classroom are spent effectively. And we need to support teachers with modern approaches, pedagogical literacy teaching approaches, and the right textbooks, and parents to support reading at home so that children, all children, can learn to read. And they learn to read with comprehension, with the fluency that will allow them so that what they read enters into their brain and they understand it. Very, very important endeavor. This is the fifth webinar, building upon regional report that we launched last year. And it's not just a webinar series. We are building up country programs from the World Bank support, with support, investment into countries so that we support what can happen at a country level with modernizing literacy strategies, hopefully provide more textbooks that are interesting to all, and supporting teachers in having the right updated tools to teach in an interesting manner Arabic literacy, and have measurement tools at a classroom, school level, and national level. So there's really a huge agenda. A key part of that agenda is what we're going to discuss today, struggling readers. And an element of that is boys. It is a global phenomenon that boys are not learning to read as fast as girls, but it is in particularly a reading in Arab countries. The boys are further behind the girls across the Middle East and North Africa. And it's something that really requires attention. We cannot raise the level without raising the level of reading fluency of boys. And there's a lot that can be done, and we're going to discuss that today. But we really need to make sure that we get focus on struggling readers. Otherwise, we can't raise everybody. So I'm very much looking forward to today. And again, it's not just a one-off webinar. This is something we really want to continue and moving forward at a country level with large effort, institutional effort from the World Bank side. So back to you, Hanada, and the experts. Thanks very much also to the experts for joining today. We look forward to you, and we count on your expertise and knowledge to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas. This was great. It really summed up so much of what we will be talking about in detail today. شكرا لك جزيلا.
Thank you, Andreas, once again. Now we will turn to our experts, and we will begin our dialogue today with Dr. Sami Yahmoumi, who is a lecturer at the Bahrain Teachers College. Dr. Sami, we know that about 60% of students across the region are struggling to read, and this was existing before the COVID COVID-19 pandemic. We do not know exactly where this percentage has reached. So based on your experience and your information and your research, what advice do you have for schools and teachers on how they can support those children, those struggling children within the regular classroom? And how can they make sure that all children are reaching the expectations in Arabic literacy? Dr. Rahmouni, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Dr. Hanada, and thank you to the organizers of this important webinar. If language brings people together, then reading brings people together even more effectively. I do not want to remind you of some of the very obvious matters that have made reading and writing as a passage to be involved in life and to be self-satisfied on all levels. From the question you have asked, Dr. Hanada, I have three advices, I believe. First of all, there should be a diagnosis of the reality that we can consider as a disaster in the educational field or an imminent one, especially because the percentage that you mentioned was there before the pandemic. And we know what has the impact on the schools of the schools due to the pandemic, which imposed distant learning, which succeeded in some cases, but failed in many other regions. Second of all, I believe that this question is coming from the principle of on what are the principles of education. We cannot, there is no struggling student, but there's a struggling student who is struggling to read. According to studies, the student who is struggling to read could fall into illiteracy, and the fastest way to save them requires a lot of efforts, more than the efforts that are being given to this child in his early stages of teaching. Second of all, it is the right of all students, of all children, to a good education. And this is the main principle. And this is the reason why we are meeting today to tackle this important issue. Third of all, we have to determine what the needs are for quick, effective solutions that the teachers can benefit from. And also we have to look for sustainable solutions. Reading is not treated, struggling to read is not treated with a pill. If we look for long-term solutions, I believe that we have to reconsider the curricula, the textbooks, the teachers' preparation, the trainers, specialized reading staff for the students who assist the teachers, the language teachers at school, so that they can contribute in one way or another to tackle the difficulties. But this solution requires from us at least to reconsider the teaching policies. So now what can I, as a teacher, for example, in my classroom, I have several students who are struggling to read. What do I do in this case? I believe that we have to pay attention to an important issue related to the many attempts that were made in order to advance the level of struggling students. Despite the seriousness of these efforts and their reliance on many researchers, I believe that this matter was looked in from one angle, which is the knowledge angle, and we neglected the self. We should not forget an important matter that many other researchers have confirmed, and that is that the problem of many struggling readers are their fear of reading and fear of failing in reading or failing to read. So how can teachers eliminate this fear? Very simply, a teacher can eliminate this fear within the students by telling the student in various ways about the purpose or objective of reading. And you can dispel these fears by explaining to the students that they are there to support them to not fall into the trap of being categorized as a failed reader or non-failed reader. And you can dispel these fears of learning to read or reading when you give the student more than one chance to read. And you can also dispel these fears to read by enriching or using principles confirmed by various researchers pertaining to by training by teaching them to on learning between peer-to-peer learning. You can also handle and manage this fear by giving the student more than one opportunity to make up for the mistakes that they did while reading. So you have to teach the student to pronounce the words before reading the full sentence, for example. So we have to eliminate this fear by doing a collective or group reading in class, because these are one of the strategies that do not cost us a cent. So we have to think of the struggling reader and to eliminate their fear of reading in order to open the doors for them. Another issue that some researchers insist on and that have proven to be effective are the following. For example, when I am teaching a student, I have to adopt, follow a strategy of pronunciation, of pronouncing the vowels, I have to explain to the student these strategies and why. Because the learners learn better when you explain to them how they learn and why they will learn. And therefore, I believe that this method is based on not just only explaining the content, but explaining to the student how to learn. As for the knowledge-based aspects in general, I do not want to add a lot to what has been said and various researchers that have handled this matter. We have a lot to handle. When we talk about reading, we are talking about a complicated activity. Yes, it is complicated, but it is an activity that comes from the self. When this means that when we read a text, we are impacted by what we read. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry. So what if, how about when this starts from an early stages or early environments? And we can imagine the type of texts that could help the students to learn how to read, because when we work on the self, the knowledge will be a complementary activity to the learning. So it is sufficient for the learner to engage in reading and loving to read and having the passion to read, and handle other books besides the school textbooks, such as stories at home. So he establishes a relationship between himself and the book to overcome the obstacles. When we talk about the difficulties, if you allow me, I am perhaps taking too much time, but in fact, we cannot solve this problem in 10 minutes. No, please go ahead, doctor. We are with you. We can talk and talk for hours and stop at one point. We will hope through these discussions to open the doors. Yes, there are problems related to the weak phonetics and problems related to fluency. And we know that fluency is tied to how the student distinguishes the signs, the letters, whether it is related to reading or writing. Because just as we have fluency in reading, we also have fluency in writing. And the relationship between reading and writing is undeniable. The solutions in this case are a lot. And I have previously mentioned Dr. Hanada in many events before that we have a treasure in the Arab world, which is the diglossia. And this makes us use the local language or local dialects or the local dialects. And we have to build the bridges that will identify the level between the modern standard Arabic and the dialect. So it is sufficient for us to encourage the student and to go back to the self. So the learner has to know that in his dialect that he speaks with, there are words that are modern standard Arabic, and we have to encourage him to use them without being shy. And the teacher has to explain that this word, if he hears it for the first time, they have to explain to them the source or the meaning of the word. So we have to work on this level, and we have to work on the popular words or the visual words, and we have to also make the student get used to compile a lexicon with the new terms that he discovers, or a lexicon of words that he comes up with himself, but that are as a part of his dialogue every day or reading and writing. So there are many, many strategies. It is not enough time to mention them all. And also maybe when it comes to reading on the teaching level and the pedagogical level, we always hear that people say that reading is based on 3 skills, pre, during, and after. Practically speaking, whether the case is about Tunisia or other countries, the pre-reading stage is usually drowned with vowels or vowelized texts. So I call for example, paying attention to the pre-reading stage. Why? Because it has been proven from a long time ago that students have to be empowered with a pre-reading stage. We cannot expect the student to expect how the words are going to be vowelized or marked. And also in our schools, we have been used to the fact that we do not explain what the words are unless we are doing reading activities. So researchers have shown that the struggling is tied to the new words in the texts that the students are reading for the first time. So why do we not apply a very simple strategy? And I will call it the traffic sign strategy: red, yellow, and green. When the light is red, we will ask the teacher to write words, and we will ask the learners to categorize or identify those words in red. The students can say, for example, I do not know, and if they do not know, they can categorize them in the yellow, and what the words they know, they can categorize them under the green light. So this way, the learner can know and the teacher can know where the difficulties are in the words, and this will be analyzed from the beginning. And this will be helpful, of course, if it is done in a lexicon that the student compiles. So just as it has been proven also this way, the student can memorize that this word is a word that he struggled with, and after exploring it further, he can know how to read it now. We should not only be sufficient with a forecasting of what the outcome of the student will be. There has to be a preparation for the students. There are researchers have shown also that it is okay to pause for a little bit while we are reading and ask them to summarize what they read, what they just read. This will allow them to get used to record in their minds how reading is done. And it is okay to stop and ask and the teacher ask the student, okay, what do you think will happen now? And here I'm talking about 10-year-old students. We can ask them simple questions at this age. We know that in primary schools, there is a big focus on read narratives. And this will allow them to handle the text. And also I ask for, why do we not ask for using mapping or other tools that will allow the student to understand, to memorize information. So what is important here is that maybe in the general framework, as I said, we cannot talk about all the solutions in 10 minutes, but as I've been talking, I've been thinking about a matter that that I liked, and it was in a book on teaching to read. There's a table that says that reading is not considered as a phase of development for in persons. Reading is continuous and is planned, where the teachers give the student a task to get him closer to reading by eliminating his fear. The second thing that I liked summarizes everything. By teaching, we did not intend it to be a process for you to achieve a perfection, because perfection is left to God only. Maturity and asking questions and feeling lively while reading, in reading and teaching to read, is done through a collaborative process where it connects the teacher to the student, to his parents, to the specialized staff, for example, if needed, in order to make the experience of reading a positive one for all. And I believe that this saying, which I liked in the book that I read, summarizes everything. And I will stop here, and I hope I have not exceeded my time. And I apologize if there have been any anything that did not go well. Thank you very much, Dr. Rahmouni. What you have mentioned contains practical ideas, ideas that can be implemented by educational practitioners in classrooms. We thank you very much. And this concoction that you just gave us between knowledge comprehension and the self and the focusing on the self in when it comes to reading, and the texts that sense that affect us within is important. Thank you, and we will go back to you with some questions in this webinar. Thank you.
We now move to Professor Bill Grosso. He is the honorary professor of reading and writing skills at George Mason University.
You've extensively worked and wrote about boys' education. And in your writings, we know from what you say that boys are disproportionately, it seems, among the children who are struggling readers. And the gap seems to be larger in the MENA region than elsewhere. What can be done based on your, all the work that you have done in this on this area to engage boys more in reading and improving their Arabic literacy outcomes? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Hanada, and thank you to the World Bank and the Queen Rania Foundation for inviting me to be part of this webinar. As our previous speaker mentioned, it's very difficult to solve these problems in just a few minutes, but I want to start with a very obvious truth about reading. And I think it's one we often forget about, and that is the more one reads, the more one becomes a skillful reader. And I want to point out this obvious case up front, because it doesn't matter how many specific literacy skills we try to teach boys. If they choose not to exercise those skills by engaging in reading frequently and with enthusiasm, they're simply not likely to progress. And this really gets me to a very inescapable connection, I think, between essential cognitive skills on the one hand and motivation on the other. I like to frame it, Hanada, as the skill and will of reading. And unfortunately, far too many boys in MENA are deficient in both aspects of what it takes to be a really competent reader. So let's begin with the premise that any intervention for struggling boys must be comprised of two strands, but braided together into a strong cord of creative effort. One strand needs to be devoted to developing essential cognitive skills necessary for competent reading. But the other strand, just as vigorously applied, needs to focus on motivating boys to be regular and engaged readers. So I have three broad areas of consideration for building the skill and will for reading among boys and male youth in MENA. And I'll start here. It all begins in the home. Boys' reading attitudes and abilities do not form in a vacuum. They emerge first and foremost from family, and of course later from school, community, and societal values, but they emerge first and foremost from family. Parents who read generally raise children who are readers. So politicians, community leaders, clergy can do so much to help improve boys' chances for greater literacy achievement. And they can do this in the region by promoting parental support of reading for boys through literacy campaigns, through media messaging, and using all available advertising outlets to get that word out. They can support family book clubs, for instance. I've had great success, at least in the American context, with creating book clubs so boys can read with their parents and read with their older brothers and sisters and be a part of that community at home around text. We can support library and mosque and church-based programs targeted to boys whose literacy is least likely to be supportive in the home. And we can create incentives for fathers to be reading role models for their sons, especially those boys who are at risk of learning poverty. And I'll come back to this issue of role models in just a moment. The second big area, of course, is nurturing the reading skill and will in school. And here, teachers and specialists should build foundational literacy skills with engaging texts and practices. Young boys, of course, need the same basic literacy skills as all children, but the goal is to teach these skills in ways that capture and hold boys' attention and interest. You know, my work in clinical practicum in reading for nearly four decades, I've had great success with my graduate interns doing such things with boys as improving their listening comprehension by reading texts that they really are interested in hearing about. And often with male protagonists, we find that boys often prefer books that have a male lead character, or at least books that are talking about men and male figures from history, perhaps. But that's one way we can improve their listening comprehension. We can develop their oral language by engaging boys in creative conversations around books. Through role plays, we've done things like interviewing the main character as a news reporter. So we get boys to use their language, but do it in a creative context. The tiny elements of reading, such as reinforcing the teaching of letters and sounds and syllables and words. Why not use play and movement, especially with boys who have a lot of gross motor activity, and sometimes we can get them involved in these activities while learning these important elements of reading. And when it comes to developing fluency, I've had great success in our clinical work using strategies such as readers' theater, where boys take on roles from stories and practice scripts so that they can read them very fluently. And then with other boys, they actually give a performance of that text by reading fluently with pace and expression and so on. So these are some ways that we can promote those basic skills in engaging ways for boys. And teachers and specialists should also match texts and literacy activities to boys' interests as much as possible. I'm often telling my clinicians, you know, don't ask a struggling reader what he likes to read. He'll probably tell you, I don't like anything to read, because of course they don't want to read if they can't do it very well. So what we do is we try to find out what boys like to do outside of school, where their interests lie. And this can be done in simple ways through direct conversation or inventories, but it can also be done in creative ways. And we've used the technique we call the My Bag, which involves putting emblems of what a boy likes to do in terms of hobbies and outside activity in a backpack or some container, and then shares these with the teacher or the specialist. And we find out a great deal about their interest, and then we try to find books and texts that match those areas. Obviously, at some point, we need to create time in the school day for boys to read those texts and to talk about them, write about them with a partner or a teacher or a specialist. I'll get to my third issue then. And to me, I don't know how we can deny the power of this notion, and that is role models make a difference in boys' lives. I mean, we have all the evidence we need by just looking around us. I'd like to say that just to tell boys to read without authentic role modeling of that desired behavior is just not going to work. Boys may be very bad at listening to their elders, but they're pretty darn good at imitating them. So the best role models, according to research, at least in the North American context, are mentors who actually match culturally and gender-wise with their mentees. So young boys who are struggling as readers, they need to see and interact with older boys and men who are engaged and enthusiastic readers. I think this can be done in MENA in lots of ways, but the simplest approach is just to pair boys who are struggling readers with male mentors. You know, lots of men who are retired from their work, who live in the community, want to come back and volunteer in their schools. And you can create programs that bring them back into the school to provide that mentoring. These men have lived interesting lives. They have a lot to share, a lot to offer to young struggling boys. And those one-on-one arrangements can be organized in school or in the community, at public libraries, and so on. I've had great success with an approach we call cross-age tutoring, where we have an older adolescent boy who's a struggling reader, but we pair him with a very young boy who's a struggling reader. And with the supervision of a teacher or a specialist, both boys will improve their literacy. And also, of course, create this kind of relationship that's so important. I emphasize these mentoring aspects because what boys need to do is they need to be able to see that they can be boys, and they can also integrate literacy within their masculine or male identities. And this brings me to the last suggestion of forming community-based book clubs for boys. I've seen some fantastic examples of these in various places. When I was on sabbatical at the University of Cologne in Germany, my colleague there, Christina Gaba, had this really cool program called Kicking and Reading, where she was teaming young boys who love football, love soccer, who were struggling readers with these professional footballers. So they acted as mentors for these young boys as well as providing some support for them for reading. In California, I was familiar with a program that was called Books and Balls, which was based around community youth baseball, where the baseball teams were also book clubs. And again, what's so powerful about that is these older men serve as role models, not only for athleticism and good sportsmanship, but they also serve as role models for reading. So these young boys who are struggling but want to be good footballers, want to be good baseball players, can also see how they can integrate literacy within their identities as boys. So I'll conclude, Hanada, by saying that we need to go back to what I think underpins all our work with boys, and that is, in MENA, boys will only improve if they read regularly and with enthusiasm. And all of us can play a role to help make this happen. And so I'll conclude with a final statement that boys and girls are our hope for the future, but we are their hope today. Thank you very much, Hanada.
Thank you very much, Bill. This is wonderful and touching. هذه أيضا الأفكار العملية والبعض
These practical
الممارسات
ideas and some practices that have proven to be successful in terms of role modeling and reading with influential people in society. All of these are ideas, important ideas, and I believe they will benefit our audience in giving these, providing these practical experience. Thank you very much, Professor Bill Brozo. And now we move to Dr. Hazem Fahmy, Chairman, CEO of CARE, and Ms.
برنامج
Arish
التعليم
Hijazi, Director of the Learning Program at CARE, Egypt. The question to you at the same time, we know that some students will fall behind a lot and will fail to achieve their outcomes, the expected outcomes. And we see that you have worked a lot and extensively in Egypt on identifying students who, and then putting in place plans to meet their needs. Can you please describe to us your own experience and how these students were identified? How did you follow up on their situation? What kind of support did you provide to them? Were there learned lessons that can perhaps help us here in attempting to achieve the intended goal? Please go ahead. Thank you, Dr. Hanada. We're delighted to be with you today. Thank you very much for the World Bank and the Queen Rania Foundation. I will start by saying that learning how to read is very important because we are concerned in building the human being and achieving their dignity. And a child, when he or she learns, they would be able to find a good job in the future. He'll be able to be a good citizen and more skillful citizen and a good citizen. Therefore, our approach to this issue is based on the human dignity before anything else. Since 2008, the Ministry of Education in Egypt has been concerned has launched a big project on reading skills, and we started to work with them. Unfortunately, the first project we managed to get funding for was in 2014. The work that the Ministry of Education has done was to change the curricula and the teaching methods in elementary schools. When we started to work with the fourth grade students who were not fortunate to start with the new program before. My colleague Arik will be talking in more detail on all these issues, but what I would like to stress here, when we go back to the schools that we have worked with for 2 or 3 years, we don't only find that the confidence of students has improved, but we find that the number of students falling behind is far less than those we started working with. So what does that tell us? It's a problem that we can eliminate. And that's the bright side of the issue. But who were those fortunate to start this program, and who will be fortunate to participate in this? This is an issue that we have to focus on. Part of what we do also is that we work with the school administration and the teachers themselves, and this creates learning environment conducive for learning these skills. We were also very delighted to get funding since 2014 until 2021, and we have many practical experiences, and Ms. Arij will be talking about this. But before I conclude, I would like to emphasize how important it is to understand that this is something that we can solve, and it's very important for building the future citizen. We have a video that will extend for a minute and a half, and it can be found on our website.
كان في مطلوب من التلامذه ان هم يعملوا كلمه يقطعوها مقاطع صوتيه. الكلمه دي كانت كلمه الفراشه. كان حاجه عجبتنا جدا 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 وانبهرنا بيها، ان طفله من الاطفال اللي هي بنقول عليها دون المستوى، اللي هي الضعيفه، تقف. واحنا اصلا لما جينا نحط الاختبار ده كنا اتشكلت لجنه كبيره على مستوى اداره على مستوى محافظه بني سويف، محافظه المنيا، وقتلنا الموضوع بحثا فعلا. وقدرت تقول لنا يا استاذ الكلمه دي فيها خطا. بصينا في الورق، يا بنتي ايه اللي خطا؟ يا ماما كلمه الفراشه مكتوبه صح ايه؟ يا استاذ لا. يا ماما طب قولي لي انت ايه؟ قالت لي يا استاذ انطق كلمه الفراشه. قلت لها الفراشه. قالت لي يا استاذ حدد لي حرف الفاء صوته ايه؟ قلت لها الفاء، يبقى الفاء مفتوح. قالت لي بص في الورقه لقيت الفاء ساكنه. يا خبر ابيض، يا ماما انت اسمك ايه؟ وفعلا البت دي انا حافظ اسمها اعتماد، وفعلا موجوده في المدرسه دي عندنا.
شكرا فيديو جدا جميل.
Thank you very much. That was a beautiful video.
Thank you very much.
That was very.
This was a good conclusion to what you wanted to say. An image is worth 100 words.
I know that now we are.
And now we will be going
move on
to Ms. Arij.
Dr. Arij to continue with us.
Continue. To tell us more about the experience. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Hanadi. Dr. Hanadi, thank you very much. And hello and welcome to everyone from various regions. As we have seen from the video, I am focusing more on a practical experience done by CARE in Upper Egypt. I will focus more between the period 2018 to 2020. We conducted a project with my school, and we got funding from Dubai Cares. As we saw from the beginning of the video, the teacher was talking about the assessment tool that was used in the beginning, and this allowed us to know who are the struggling readers, and this tool is used by the academic institution at the Ministry of Education. It measures the level of reading with the 10 skills for literacy skills, and we focused on 10,000 students almost. And based on the results that we obtained from the 4th, 5th, and 6th grades, about 50% of the schools who were in the weakest category, 35% were in the category B, and 15% of them were in the C category, which is considered the highest level of literacy. It is worth noting here that most of the students who were struggling in category A, they came from families whose parents were illiterate or their education level was very minimal. We did not see big differences between boys and girls in this category, but what drew our attention the most was the fact that the parents were not educated. we did an intervention and we conducted a remedial program with the cooperation of the Ministry of Education, and we implemented it in the schools. And the program was focused on direct interventions with the students, and we did an intervention with 14,000 students for about 6 months. With 40 lessons, each lesson for about 2 hours, conducted after school hours. This experience was very successful, and in the end of the experience, we did an assessment and we saw that those who were in category A moved on to category B, and their grades improved by 80%. And this is a big success, and some of them were able to move on to the highest level. And of course, this was within the 6 months, and the follow-up was being done through supervisors, coaches from the school administration as well. And I will talk quickly about the lessons learned here. And I'm very pleased that all the speakers who spoke before us, before CARE, they really touched on the issues that we have done and the practical experience, and that have proven that they are a solution. First of all, we were dealing with the educational system as a whole. We were not dealing with the struggling readers. And we worked with the teachers, all the teachers, the classroom teachers, the social service experts, librarians, mentors, coaches. Everyone at school needed to understand what the problem was, because the problem cannot be solved in the Arabic language class or a subject. Everyone needed to know so that they can help struggling children. Direct interventions with fathers or mothers. We also did day camps where the parents can be involved and taught them that they should focus on the reading. And we worked with the parents to explain the problem so that they would not resist. And this was one of the most important things in the interventions we conducted. Third of all, we were working with all the classroom activities, such as you saw in the video, for example. We use the phonetics, the vowels, the words, the syllables, the phonetics, and we also worked with the students before the interventions. The students did not have self-confidence, did not have the confidence to read. All these psychological factors, we had to deal with them, especially when it came to teaching to reading. We wanted to overcome the challenges with self-confidence. The student in the video, she was able to tell the teacher, no, teacher, there is something wrong in the lesson. So she became more confident. We worked on self-esteem issues. We worked on everything that is simple in the school that we could use. Just as we say, we polish the students, restore their confidence. This was very important. And also within the classrooms that we were working for on reading, we were helping the teachers with aid material, for example, a white chalkboard, colored markers. These are simple tools, but they left a big impact and a good impact on the students. The students who are standing, who are sitting, who are gesturing with their hands, all of these simple matters were very attractive to the students, and they allowed them to be to read regularly throughout those 6 months. And also the culture of reading, more than one speaker has mentioned this. We were able to implement and promote this culture of reading through one simple process, such as reading competitions, like a week special dedicated for reading, a reading week, competitions with other schools in the district. And after the COVID pandemic, we worked with a partner organization to on app for reading to be downloaded on the phones, where the students can read a story on their phones and do an activity with their parents, and send a video of themselves talking about the story that they read. And this helps in raising the level of reading for the students. The last thing that I want to conclude with, as Dr. Hazem was saying, is the concept of the amendments in the Egyptian curricula helped to a great extent to limit the numbers of the struggling readers. But within the schools, we were able to see the change and the number of struggling students started to reduce to a great extent. And also we need to see in the other schools that have not had their whole system be treated. So was this sufficient to reduce the numbers or not? I believe that this answer is very important for the decision makers. I will conclude by saying that there is hope, and the practical experiences that are being conducted have been conducted, and they have led to a change. And what we want to see is more experiences like these in Egypt. And thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Arish. So it is so delightful to hear about these success stories from within the Arab world, from within Egypt. And we see how through simple tools we can create a change. The educational system does not need billions of dollars and does not need so much effort, but with simple tools, we can see an impact, a change, and success. Thank you very much for this your presentation, and for the video, and for Atimad's story and the butterfly story. They are very beautiful. We will not forget them. And now I move on to Professor Haytham Taha. He is a professor at Western Galilee University and the director of the research lab at Sakhneen College for Teachers Education. Dr. Haytham, we are very pleased to have you with us once again in this important webinar and the series of these webinars. We want to move on to your deep specialization, which is related to the difficulties in learning language. And based on your experiences and researches that are excellent in this field, can you explain to us the types of specific difficulties that are found among Arabic learners, especially in reading? How do you diagnose them, and what can be done to support those children and young people who are affected by these difficulties in the simplest ways? It seems that there is a theme, an overarching theme in this webinar. How can we come up with the simplest tools and methods to know who are the strugglers, and in order to give them the support that they require? The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Dr. Hanada. Thank you to the attendees, the participants, and thank you for inviting me for the second time to the series of webinars. Detecting or diagnosing struggling readers is a process that has to be accurate, because we are talking about different levels of struggling children. It could be that the struggle could be something psychological or environmental, or pressures, or inappropriate environments that impact the abilities of the students, and the disparities, of course, between the different students in different classes and different environments, and the discovery of language and so on. Basically speaking, the diagnosis and determining the difficulties in reading is a process that needs a deep study in order to be accurate in our diagnosis of the reading struggles and their types. I will give you a simple example in order to explain what we mean by the accurate diagnosis in order to detect the various categories. For example, we have two students in the 5th grade. We give them a tool to measure their literacy. We give them 50 words, ask them to read, and they know these words. And these words are without context. These two students obtain the same success rate in the reading, and they read the words at the same speed, 40 minutes per word, 40 words per minute, knowing that the two students suffer from the same difficulties. However, they read at the same rate or pace, and they did the same mistakes. When we talk about the diagnosis, we have to begin with first what comes after the accuracy. What are the mistakes? The first student maybe made non-phonetic mistakes, and he read he made phonetic errors, and the second student made errors, the morphological mistakes. We have two different students in terms of the types of the mistakes, and this shows us that the difficulties in reading differ. And we, of course, we took into consideration the speed, the pace, when it came to assessing the difficulty. And we had to here rely on the tools. Of course, these tools require a deep study to understand the difficulties. And in order to understand the various mistakes, we know that determining the diagnosis of the difficulties in reading, we know that each person has a certain level and different level of difficulties. So talking about the skills of reading, it is an acquired skill. This skill, because we are acquiring the language, and it is not acquired automatically. This does not mean that if a child is in an environment of reading, he can pick it up quickly. No, there has to be a commitment to the reading process, and where the brain makes us get used to a new skill with what we have available. For example, identifying the symbols. This means that the student has to use these familiar symbols, for example. And then we can see the various levels of difficulties between the different readers. What we can do is to do an early forecasting or projection and early measure before engaging with the direct reading and the pre-reading stages and the kindergarten stages or in the early childhood stages. In the first 4 years, we can use early projection tools in these stages, and we can diagnose or expect what could the difficulties that these children could face. For example, the pace of naming the sounds, identifying the phonetics, and the students who are lower in level in terms of these capabilities, maybe they are the ones who are more at risk of facing reading difficulties. And learning that is based on potential statistical learning. All the effectiveness of learning is based on understanding the repetition of the letters that are used according to various rules when it comes to the pronunciation of the letters, and understanding these learning through implicit learning. And these could be measured before the students are learning at school. Before they start learning reading at school. There are certain groups in early childhood education. We could see that some of their challenges will come out at later stages in life. And early intervention is important here because when we discover that the child suffers from reading challenges, maybe we can do precautionary and early intervention programs to tackle the reading challenges and struggles. And at the beginning, we heard from Dr. Sami the fear of reading. It is very important to note this because in grade 1, grade 2, when students are starting to learn to read, we can see that there are difficulties in reading in grades 1 and 2. And therefore, when we do an early intervention before the student reaches grade 1 and 2 through intervention programs that are rich to enrich their reading skills, this could lessen the risks at later on, at later stages. And also, there are things related to the mechanisms of intervention in school years. And these mechanisms that do not take into consideration the motivation element. The motivation element is very important. In addition to the conscience element, the self element, and this motivation is based on making the student desire to read or to the desire to get the engage in the treatment program, for example. We have to encourage the students, for example. Today, for example, using computers that have educational games that integrate reading acceleration in order to make the student more fluent in reading. All these games, of course, have a certain challenge, a challenge with the self, and they will allow the student to deal with the various exercises that will handle his reading challenges. And of course, these interventions should be positive, and responding to these challenges should also be positive on the other side. And we have to also examine and see to what extent these interventions succeeded. All of this revolves on understanding the scientific understanding of the reading skill, of the basics of readings, through the pedagogy of pedagogical elements of reading. This is how we can reach to the need of training the staff or the teachers specialized in reading. So far till today, in most of the countries, whether Arab countries or elsewhere, even in countries that are highly developed, there is no alternative to not, or there's not a specialized reading teacher. Usually it is the teacher of the first grades who study in general the processes related to teaching reading, teaching mathematics. There are no specialized teachers who are specialized in the psychology of reading. And this skill requires a specialization, an intensive one, so that the teacher, when he is faced with a struggling reader, he can identify precisely what the student is suffering from. Reading comprehension, and so on, or listening. It could be a listening problem, etc., or a memory problem. And the teacher should be able to tie between the different difficulties. All these can become evident if the teachers are trained from a general training to a specialized training. A specialized training, there should be a specialized teacher in reading, just as there's a specialized teacher in mathematics, for example. All of these matters should be taken into consideration when we say that we want to overcome the problems, the various problems of reading. Of course, another point here, and the last one, of course, I can talk forever of these matters, but the last thing is that environment plays an important role, the environment where the child is being brought up and the interaction between the children themselves. A reading environment, of course, gives a student or a child yes, the ability to read, but it does not really diagnose the challenges deeply. The child has to be exposed to reading, to writing. Yes, of course, the child who comes from a rich environment, an environment rich in reading and writing, of course, is going to differ than a child who comes from an environment where reading and writing is not rich. This is what I wanted to say, and I am ready for any question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Haytham. We notice that there are repeated themes in everything that has been said. I will leave my notes to the observations to the end because I want to hear from you. There are some questions from the attendance. I will start with a question
Bill Brozo
from Professor Bill Brozo.
One of the audience is talking about the family's role. You've talked about the environment, the family's role, and how important it is. But what they are saying is that if the family is illiterate, if the literacy levels are so low, there's not much that you can do. What are some solutions apart from that? It will mean, according to what the participant is saying, it will all be, the whole weight will be on the school and on the teacher. Any thoughts, any ideas with that?
Yeah, that's a really big challenge, Hanada, and I'm glad that came up because it's an issue that, of course, all of us have to deal with, regardless of our geographical context. We do have parents who maybe can't read themselves. They come from such low means economically that they don't even have time, for instance, to read. We've done a couple things. I mean, I think we've heard this from a previous speaker who shared the video. This idea of trying to work across generations, so that you're not only training the child to become a better reader, you're actually training the parents to become readers as well. And of course, it does take some incentives to get them to participate in these programs, and we have to create the time for that. And that's maybe where, our institutional governments and so on come into play to try to support that kind of work. And I'll say one more thing. We've had some success with like an older brother or sister who is literate in the family, who can also share with a younger child books and reading and so on. And the volume really does make a difference. Having books in the home, and again, if parents can't afford them, we need some mechanism to get those books in the home. But having the books in the home, having someone at least who can try to introduce a younger reader or a younger struggling student to those books really can make a difference. But it is a very vexing issue, and I'm sure the rest of the panel would agree.
Thank you. شكرا جزيلا Bill.
Thank you very much, Bill. The questions will be open to everyone. I will be asking another question, but anyone who wants to go back to a previous question, please go ahead. We have some time to take many questions. I will ask another question open for everyone, but I'll be asking Dr. Sami first. Dr. Sami, the question from one of the attendees asks about the idea, why don't we have simple dictionaries In your opinion, why is there no simple dictionary given to students that would, or that could be made available to them online that they could refer to? Another part of the question says, why don't we see, as we see in English, common words in Arabic? These are very important questions. The first question takes us to the idea of dictionaries in general, without using a rosy language. For those who follow the human issues in general, and French TV, and that's the only thing I watch, unfortunately. Anytime it announces the appearance of a new edition of Robert or any other dictionary, Robert 2022 or so, etc., etc., I feel unhappy, especially if I compare the situation of French to Arabic, because indeed, the production of dictionaries is something that is not advanced, because regardless of the nature of these dictionaries, whether they're addressed to the adults or children, let us ask ourselves the following question: are there credible studies showing us how much a student benefits from Arabic dictionaries? In my opinion, very simple studies that can be carried out by specialized journals exist, but they have no impact. And perhaps this is a question that can be an issue that could guide policymakers, and so that they can pay attention to the issue of dictionaries and specialized dictionaries for early childhood and children in general, to better assist us with the issue of reading. The issue of common words is tied to writing literature, children literature. I experimented with this with my own students. I told them, imagine you are writing a story for first grade student. What I noticed, maybe perhaps because of our age, we never write for children. We think about readers who are who can fully read, and we forget even using very simple words. And we can even write the most exciting story addressed to children. So the opinion is that we have to address the cultural and academic aspects of these issues, and also to tie it to the policies on education in general. So, of course, this is a point of weakness in our Arab world and Arab countries. When we pay attention strictly and seriously to this issue, we can address it, and many issues will be changed. Allow me just, Hanada, to add one thing. I paid full attention to everything has been said, and in spite of us being in different areas, but there are very common ideas that were proposed by Dr. Haytham and others. And this is evidence that what unites us when it comes to reading, even it is enough for these ideas to spread, so that the culture of reading would spread. We should be able to make this qualitative transformation, to even start to think about a teacher who will specialize just in reading. Just like we have teachers who specialize in teaching science and social sciences, and the teachers' main concern would be to overcome the difficulties that students face in reading. Let me interject here, Dr. Sami. We get you, and we totally agree with you. We believe that there's some echo that is happening as a result of all this dialogue and conversation. Thank you very much. This takes me the idea of what Dr. Sami said about the idea of a comprehensive and integrated system that Mr. Hazem and Arish said is to involve everyone as a system. And there's a question from the attendance about curricula. And we know that the curricula touch upon many areas, like we have ministries, decision makers, parents, students, and teachers. The question on curricula says, as you know, the students spend too much time on large curriculum, very meaty curricula in a very tight time, and this doesn't allow them time to play. In your opinion, what is the solution? What can we propose to ministries of education, especially when it comes to curriculum? Based on what you've seen and worked on, you talked about early intervention. You have worked on much, on little things and effective, and you did not drown students, as we have heard from you, with a large quantity of content. Dr. Hazem, Ms. Arish, please go ahead. Thank you very much for the question. I'm not a specialist here, but the response is in the question itself. It's simplification and simplicity, and to also introduce science and those topics with some fun involved in them. So we normally, for example, with poetry, we introduce poetry that students don't relate to. And I was happy to hear Dr. Sami talk about the importance of slang and the use of it. And so it's important to focus on simplicity. And that's from the perspective of somebody who practices and learning, but I'm not an instructor myself. And perhaps Ms. Arish has more to add. I will be adding to what you said, Doctor, by saying that the idea of curricula being too complicated and too much and higher than the level of education of reading among students is an issue we face. But as I said in the beginning, when we deal with the school, we deal with the system as a whole, with the instructor who comes to the teacher to see how he's dealing with the curriculum and to understand the difficulties faced. So this is a very important point. We deal with the teacher to see how he or she can deal with the other activities in school, not just to focus on the Arabic language teacher. We deal with the science teacher, the math teacher, even the PE teacher, and the drawing teacher, music teacher. So I deal with the experience of a child at school as a comprehensive experience. After he or she should be able to have captured a lot at school. So for me, the experience is all the classes, not just the curricula in Arabic or linguistic curricula, but the whole experience to foster a culture of education. All of this allows the student to acquire all these skills and to have the motivation for school, for reading. I believe Dr. William talked about this, the incentive for a student to read. This happens inside the classroom and outside the classroom. So we try to find realistic and practical solutions, because ultimately it works with the long curriculum, and regardless of how much we deal with the instructor to take things outside the curriculum, we deal with the school as a whole. Thank you very much, Dr. Hazem and Ms. Arish. It's a very good response, and I will refer to what Dr. Hazem said, and I will take it to Professor Haytham. Dr. Hazem mentioned this duality once again. And Dr. Haytham, you talked about, or you described this duality. And Dr. Sami also said it's a treasure. There's a question from an attendee who asks, which is better, for a teacher to read and then explain in classical Arabic, or to use everyday language? In your opinion, Dr. Hazem, based on your own experience, what should we do here? What's your advice? It's very important in the first stages to I believe after achieving fluency in reading and independence, and this is very important to achieve after achieve independence in reading, because in the beginning it's a skill being taught. Afterwards, reading is used to learn. So it becomes a skill, a procedural skill. And this requires to use the linguistic ability in all its ways, meaning like it's important to translate the text in everyday language, and then to advance to the use of the Fusha language. Once the student becomes independent in reading and the linguistic skills are developed, then the student can advance in a high level without any difficulties. More importantly is to focus on preschool, on the preschool period, to focus on the Fusha. This is a language that is rife with challenges, but they can be overcome, obviously. And all of us adults have discovered that the Fusha we have learned Fusha in different stages of our life. So we tried to speak the Fusha before even learning it in a systematic way at school. So early detection and making the Fusha language a familiar language is not difficult, because children who watch the news or hears his parents listen to the radio, the Fusha is available everywhere. Even reading stories in Fusha before going to school is important. This makes it very easy for children to move from al-Fusha and to bring the Fusha to get closer to the everyday language used. This use of the duality of the language is something that is possible. So the sooner a child is able to be exposed to the Fusha, the easier it is to face this challenge. So this is the challenge of dealing with Fusha, the Fusha language. Thank you very much. This was very exciting, and I would like to remind everyone from experts and attendees that we will be holding a sixth dialogue on July 6th under the title of Reinforcing Linguistic Skills in Early Childhood. So I hope you would be able to join us, and I would like to thank the World Bank and the Queen Rania Foundation. I would like to thank our attendees, our experts, Mr. Andreas Blum, Dr. Sami Hyoumi, Bill Blossom, Professor Haytham Taha, Dr. Hazem Fahmy, Ms. Arij Hijazi. Thank you all we leave you with keywords, some keywords that came from what our experts said, such as confidence building, building the human being and his dignity and rights, building students' confidence in his own self, building incentives, build motivation, also qualifying teachers who specialize in reading and paying attention to the environment of a student. Also reading as a means to achieving material independence. These were small treasures you have left with us, and I hope that they would be also able to influence decision makers in the world we live in, and we hope we get to a better place very soon. Thank you very much, Hanada Taha. Thank you very much.